Adventure Ho, Illumineers. Welcome back to the Ducktail Dads, a Lorcana podcast. I am one of your co-hosts again, Mack, and I'm joined once again by Ryan and Nathaniel. We are now jumping into the next iteration of our staple series. That's the primary goal of this episode of the podcast, and we're highlighting the ink color Ruby. One of my true loves in this game of Lorcana. So I'm very excited to explain to our listeners about what Ruby's all about, some popular cards that we see in this ink color, and ready to dive into it. But first, we're going to jump into our favorite segment, or one of our favorite segments. It's the What's New in Your World. So, Ryan, let's start with you. What's new in your world?
Well, as we are springtime in Minnesota, I'm looking outside throughout the day and seeing the grass turning from yellow to green and thinking, man, I gotta bust out that lawnmower soon, and I'm excited about it. We got a new riding lawnmower last year, and I can't wait to get that baby out and humming again, zooming up and down our yard and just cutting that grass down low so I can not worry about it for another 10 days and then do it all over again. But yeah, that's what's new in my world. Just looking outside, seeing the green grass growing, and knowing we made it through the winter. We're in the springtime officially, and we are going to thoroughly enjoy cutting the grass on our riding lawnmower.
Sweet.
Nathaniel, what's new in your world?
Man, nothing screams dad life more than being like, I'm amped to mow the grass. It is some great me time. I gotta say, that is something I'm also looking forward to, because it also means that we have nice weather and love being able to play out in our yard with the kiddos. New in my world, my twins just celebrated a birthday, so that was really fun. I had some fun with them this past weekend, celebrating them. Just cool to see them get excited about it and share something like that together. And like referring to their twin brother as like, it's his birthday, and it's like, oh, it's also mine. Just a really unique thing, I think, that I never imagined I would get to experience from that close up as their dad. So really cool, a lot of fun to celebrate those two dudes. Mac, new in your world.
Yeah, I want to make this point to the listeners before I get into mine. We don't come in knowing what our what's new in your world topics are when we share this. Mine was going to be spring cleaning, and specifically the lawnmower as well, Ryan. So thanks for diving into that one. I bought a new lawnmower this spring, and I just brought it into the shop for some spring tune-up, and I can't wait to get it back to, again, yes, have the me time and put the earbuds in, listen to some good music while you're mowing the grass. So that's something. That's the big what's new in my world, as well as some other, spring cleaning preparation. I'm starting to get some supplies for the garden that we have. So getting ready to plant those in probably a month or so, and getting everything I need there. But yes, again, all three of us are highlighting the true dad life in spring cleaning and lawn care preparation as we dive into this Minnesota spring and summertime. So that's
also gotta say, one of the best things you could probably listen to while you are mowing your grass. You got the earbuds in, you're on your riding lawnmower. The Ducktail Dads podcast, right? What a great listen.
Well played.
So kudos to you, listener. If that is in fact what you are doing, is listening to Ducktail Dads while mowing your grass.
And I'm sure what the three of us experience while we're enjoying mowing the lawn, if we forget our sunscreen, we get that sunburn, the classic red skin. And hey, segue, we're talking about Ruby in Lorcana, the red ink color. How was that, guys?
I love that.
Amazing dad joke.
Let's roll with it.
I'll be excited to see the comments on that segue, but I had to pull that one out there as we were talking about it. So Ruby, that's the main focus of this episode with regards to our staple series. I'm diving into the Ruby ink color. Brief overview of the color. So Ruby is all about control. I think that's the simple way to put it. High strength characters, board removal, and a couple of big keywords that we see with Ruby are reckless, where if able, a character has to challenge that turn, or rush, where the turn they're played, they can challenge the turn that they're played onto the board and don't have to wait the turn, the kind of drying stage with regards to playing cards. But yeah, I would say the biggest overview of Ruby that I can think of right now is control. Ryan, Nathaniel, feel free to dive in. Is it as simple as just ultimate control? I would say the highest ceiling ink color, in my opinion, when it comes to all six of the inks. But I'll let you dive in, and if you guys have any other perspective on that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Ruby is we had talked about on our prior Ink series color of Emerald being frustrating from like a hand removal perspective. Ruby is so much more of that board removal perspective, and it's another way I like to say of hurting your opponent's feelings, right? Because their characters are just getting wiped out, whether it's one at a time or maybe many at a time for a certain card in particular that we'll talk about today. But yeah, to Mack's earlier point, we've all been burned once or twice from Ruby.
Man, we're on it with these these dad puns in this episode. Well played.
I have nothing to add. Ruby is the ultimate control ink color. If you're frustrated about losing games because you just want to control out and suffocate the opponent from their resources and can keep their board clean, your Ruby is your color. Go to Ruby, go play Ruby. You're gonna have a good time if that's how you want to play. So ultimate control. That's the way I always see it.
Yeah, and as we dive, once we get into like specific cards to prep for, right, for our audience, like a lot of Ruby staple cards are very high cost cards. So you'll begin to notice that trend as we start speaking about some of the more popular cards that we see in the Ruby type decks and the control style that Ruby seems to bring out. But speaking of types of decks, let's dive into that. So with the control style, there are 4 main decks that at least I've seen and I've played against, that being Ruby Sapphire and Ruby Amethyst. Those two have been staples since at least set 3 when I joined. When I joined a year ago at the beginning of set 3, those two decks have always had legs in whatever meta over the course of the last year. And then the other two that I have seen are Ruby Amber, specifically the Red Fasa. So the Amber Mufasa card paired with Ruby, and it's almost solely a character deck utilizing that Mufasa ability. Every time it's banished, flip the top card of your deck. If it's a character, play it on your field for free. So again, highlighting that heavy character focus type of style. And then Ruby Steel is something we've seen grown in popularity, at least with set 7, especially with the release of Mushu. Yes, and the duo Mulan, as well as the Captain Li Shang. We've with the release of those cards, we've seen. I would say it's probably not the tier 1, that being the best deck, but to surprise your opponent, maybe the tier 2, low 2, high tier 3 level, Ruby Steel. I've seen more play than I have in other sets with Ruby Steel, and that's ones out of the 4 main ones that I've seen that focuses a lot more on challenging and gaining lore with challenging and challenging ready characters. So did I miss anything, guys? We don't really see Ruby Emerald very much. Maybe you guys have, but I know that was your first deck, Nathaniel, when you started getting into the game. Was you tried an aggro Ruby Emerald deck?
Yeah, I think that was it was an interesting time because it was in set 4, and that particular deck was a like aggro evasive combination. So a lot of just a ton of evasive characters in those two decks were in that, or in those two colors were in that particular deck build, and it just was kind of a fun way to surprise some people. It was my first kind of foray into the game, but definitely an ink combination that has struggled to find a foothold in the metagame. But I think with certain cards, they have started to inject a little bit of life with it, or at least attempted to, like the Mad Hatter from the most recent set. But yeah, certainly Emerald Ruby, or Christmas, as I like to call it, one combination that just doesn't really seem to do a lot of things that you'd probably want to do to find success in terms of a color combination right now, at least.
Yeah, and I don't think there's enough options to do a mono Ruby deck either. So no. I think we covered all the major possibilities.
Actually, Ryan, that's a really good point as we get into the list of cards that we tend to see. I think what's interesting about Ruby is for how Amber or Amethyst seems to be more than half of its deck when it's in a certain build. I think Ruby is often the less than half of the deck in terms of the number of cards in that particular build. I could be wrong. Mack, you probably have better insight into that, but it does feel like the number of Ruby cards is usually going to be 30 or less. It's not usually going to be the majority of the cards.
Yeah, that goes to the high rolling of the control style, right? You have to wait your turn in order to take over the game and take control. Hence the phrase there. But with that, you need an ink pair that allows you to get to that point, and that's where you don't see as many of the Ruby cards played early, and therefore limiting you on the amount of cards you can really play late game. As you're trying to the final 3-4 turns, maybe even less of the game, that's where you start to see a lot of the Ruby cards come out, and probably the reason why you see less than half in decks when it comes to the total composition of your deck. It is composed of Ruby, so yeah, I can see that and I understand that. That makes a lot of sense to me. So I guess one question I wanted. Oh, go ahead, Nathaniel.
I was gonna say it's evidenced by when we start like listing off cards, right? Like it like expands out as we get into like now we're at 4 cost, 5 cost and up. But like there's way more stuff on that like 5 and up cost part of the chart because of the fact that it's like we're having to wait till the later game to get these massive threats on board.
Right. Absolutely. But again, it's all about getting to that point. I wanted to mention something to you guys. There was one local night, and I can't remember how long ago this was. This had to be about 6 months ago. Probably during the Emerald Steel discard meta, and I was still playing Ruby Sapphire, which was a very frustrating deck at that time. Just having all of my big cards that I was waiting to play later in the game just removed from my hand. And someone asked me, like, why are you still interested in Ruby? Like, right, Ruby, it like you said, control style, really relying on the late game, and with that discard meta, it was hard to get to that late game at certain points. With Ruby, you're relying on your secondary ink color a lot. So the two most popular are Ruby Sapphire and Ruby Amethyst. And we haven't gotten to Sapphire yet, but just a little bit of a breadcrumb for the audience here. Sapphire, being the ramping ink color, allows you to play multiple ink on a single turn. That kind of fills in the gap with Ruby and getting to that control quicker. So that's kind of why we see Ruby Sapphire as a popular combination. But Ruby Amethyst, we talked about as being probably the best complementary color in the game, or ink color in the game, because of the consistent card draw and the very very popular and useful, I'll say, early stage cards that, again, allow you to get to that late game control where Ruby starts to bleed in. I think that's why we've seen Ruby Amethyst and Ruby Sapphire for the last year, is because that consistency where the Sapphire allows you to ramp quicker to the late stage Ruby, and then the Ruby Amethyst, the Amethyst cards allow you to keep a consistent card draw and has those useful lower drop cards to then get to that control, is part of the reason where I've seen those two specific decks and ink combinations have legs over the course of the last year, and those tend to be the most popular ink colors that we've seen in DLCs, the North American and European championships. Like these are very prominent colors and always have been in that aspect as well.
Yeah, Mac, I think you bring up a great point about how it's interesting how there's these two juggernauts in the room as far as Ruby decks tend to go. One of them is I'm gonna get as much ink down as quickly as possible so that I can get to my big Ruby characters. So it's kind of cheating them out earlier, if you will, right? Like I'm getting an 8 cost Sisu, Empowered Sibling, down on, say, turn 6, right? Like usually you'd have to wait till turn 8 to play that character. Whereas the Ruby Amethyst part, it's like, because you have an abundance of cards, you're always going to be inking every turn and have the resources to keep inking to get up to 7, 8, and more ink so that you can lay down these big threats. But it's much more like a methodical march with Ruby Amethyst, and I actually did dabble a little bit in early set 6 in Ruby Amethyst, and it did feel like a very specific thing that you're doing, right? Like you're contesting the board a little bit early, and you're making sure that you always have an inkable in your hand. Just keep getting one more each turn, and that's where, like, again, that timer should go off if you're facing a Ruby deck when they are at 6. Next turn they're going to 7, and that means a be prepared, which is probably the Ruby card, right? It's probably like the one, like the big identity, right? It is the board wipe card that everybody knows. And is such a unique card, I think, because it's Ruby is one of the few colors that allows you to wipe a lot of things at once. There's not a lot of colors that can do that.
Yeah.
You think of like grab your sword from steel, kinda ish does that depending on your opponent, but like a true board wipe of I'm gonna wipe out everything in one go. Ruby is the only thing that truly has that, unless you're getting blocked by a Pete, of course. But that's neither here nor there.
I
That's where my
think
be
that
prepared doesn't work.
Yeah, I think one of the unique things that Ruby has is that I don't care what you have or what's happening on the board. I have a board reset. It's a reset button. Be prepared is the big reset button. So how do you navigate that? It creates this very clear, defining moment in whatever every game that you play against a Ruby deck or as a Ruby deck. That turn, that Ink 7 turn, is going to be a pivotal moment. Am I be preparing? Am I going to be able to be prepared on that turn? You mentioned Pete. There's a couple other things. Maybe I missed be prepared that game, but every game I'm playing against Ruby, I'm always thinking, all right, they're going to go to 7 ink. Do I want to play characters to the board that are going to get wiped? Is there a way for me to navigate around that in order to maximize benefit for me when they hit the reset button? Is there a way I can prevent that reset button from being hit? It just creates this very defining moment, and then also, what do I do after the reset button comes down? Usually it's not a matter of if it's going to come down, it's when is it going to happen. Like, when is the reset button going to be pressed, and how do I navigate the game after that reset button is pressed? Am I far enough ahead where I can just plow through and power on and drop 2 or 3 characters right after that, or drop a couple locations right after that? What threat am I presenting after that turn in order to navigate to the end of the game? Or am I going to try to just duke it out and out control them? I haven't dabbled in that very successfully in the ink colors that I've been trying, but I know Ruby Amethyst and Ruby Sapphire can just have haymaker after haymaker after haymaker back and forth until finally one of the players runs out of resources or options, and they get out controlled, and then the controller wins. So that's it. Just be prepared is definitely the defining card in my mind, and that being that easy reset button doesn't care about ward, doesn't care about evasive, doesn't care about high strength, high willpower, low willpower. It just happens. It's a reset button regardless of what's happening. And I think that's probably why it's the most meta card for Ruby. And I think in every Ruby list, there's probably going to be consideration for, can I fit a be prepared in? Maybe just 2 copies or 3 copies, but I do want to have that as an option so that I can have that reset button and then win the game after that. The other one that is kind of on that line is that big Sisu as well. What were you going to say, Nathaniel?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Be Prepared, it's such an important card for a lot of Ruby decks, to the point where when I was playing an Emerald discard deck and I played Ursula Deceiver, we talked about like getting rid of songs when you're playing against that particular deck. Usually if I saw their hand and I saw Be Prepared, that was usually the song that I was going to snipe from their hand. Like if you're playing Ruby Amethyst and they had like Friends on the Other Side and Be Prepared, and they had like one of each, I'm usually going to pick Be Prepared because it just feels like that's such a big threat, and like swing turn for them that you can take that away. I also wanted to touch, Ryan, on the point that you just made about duking it out, because this deck does do, like, this removal aspect does create this where you're just like throwing haymakers at each other. There was a time where Mack and I actually played. I was on Ruby Amethyst, he was on Ruby Sapphire, and our discard piles were absolutely ginormous, because it would be like one person would be prepared, the next turn you play a couple characters, they would, Medusa or Tremaine, like, just there was so much removal against so much removal that it felt like you were just taking swings at each other. And the matchup took a very long time. I think we got through 2 games in our roughly 50-minute allotment, both really close. And afterwards, I like needed a mental reset because I was like so mentally drained from like deciding when to use certain removal and just like constantly pivoting when my stuff would get removed because it was like so much removal at once.
Yeah, I remember that match vividly. Yeah, to your point, that was actually our set 6 set champ preparation. We got together and played that, and those were the 2 decks we were looking at that time. And to your point, set champs have always been best of 3s. And so we purposely in our friend group set a 50-minute timer to prepare for it, the time length. And granted, we were still getting used to the deck, so we were playing slower than eventually where we got. But like we just finished our second game in 50 minutes. So at that point, in a real set champs, like we wouldn't have gone to game three. We were both 1-1, and we would have just, I think, drew at that point. So maybe it wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have hurt us that much in the long run. But like, yeah, that's something to prepare for as well as you're thinking about set champs with a Ruby style control deck. Is your games tend to go longer, so you have to know the ins and outs of your deck a little bit more. I think I wouldn't go with a Ruby deck set champs if this is the first time you picked up a Ruby deck three days before you're going to set champs. The control style requires you to think more that chess mentality where you're thinking 3, 4, 5 steps ahead, as opposed to kind of the aggro style where you're just looking for your current and my next turn. That there's definitely that mindset change when it comes to preparing for with a control heavy style deck in Ruby.
Yeah. And I think like as we're thinking about how you play a Ruby deck and the characters that you're really looking for, we touched on a couple of them. I think we've referenced Maui Hero to All. We've referenced Be Prepared. We talked a little bit about the Ladies in Chairs. They're two really interesting cards in Ruby. Um,
Yeah.
we we've seen both of these be effective depending on the tournament and where the meta has gone. One of them is the Medusa, that is a 6 cost uninkable. Banish a chosen character on your opponent's side with 3 strength or less. The other lady in chair is Lady Tremaine, who is a 6 cost uninkable. And her ability is your opponent chooses one of their characters and removes them. So that actually can be an interesting card to get around Ward, which I think is really interesting because we haven't talked a lot about that particular effect, but there are certain cards in Lorcana that get around the you can't choose this character unless you're challenging it, right? Like you can't sing a song that targets that character. You can't choose to exert them. You can't choose to, but you can make your opponent do it, particularly if it's their only character on board. So I know Ed Chu ran Lady Tremaine to tremendous effect against Ruby Sapphire, knowing that it was often going to be one large character on board, or he could get it to where there would be one large character, and then he could put Lady Tremaine, so then you're forced to choose your really, really big threat. Those are two really interesting cards, and I affectionately call them the ladies in chairs because they are both ladies who are sitting on chairs, and they are two of the more mean removal gals as part of Ruby deck builds. But because they're both 6 cost, you have to wait a while to actually get these characters on board, and they don't exactly have like other than like the removal aspect of them. Like Medusa is a sorry guys help me. She's a 4/4, and
4/4,
Tremaine
yep.
is a 3/4.
Yep.
Quest for 2. Medusa quest for 1. But they're uninkable. So again, I think as you're deck building, right, like you're always thinking about what is that number of uninkables, and I think these tend to get cut before things like Be Prepared because they only cost 1 less and they do a lot less removal than a Be Prepared would do.
Yeah, and I think
I
that's
like
interesting.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And to think about, like, some of our listeners might be like, well, then why doesn't everyone play Ruby? Like, the instant banish seems absolutely broken, right? But we're talking about high cost, uninkable cards. Tremaine, Medusa, Be Prepared, and Big Sisu, Empowered Sibling. As powerful as just instant removal is in the game to immediately control the board, all of them are uninkable. And that's something to keep in mind as you're building your deck and being able to balance your inkables versus uninkables. That's why I think I've enjoyed Ruby, is that, again, going back to what I just said, that the instant removal is such a powerful ability in the game, but it's balanced well because the drawback is they're uninkable, so then you have to think about how you deck build. So I just wanted to make sure I threw that in there as people are starting to think about these decks. Almost every single instant removal card that I can think of besides Brawl and the 3-cost action that can remove a character of 2 strength or less, besides Brawl, almost every instant removal card that I can think of off the top of my head is uninkable, so that's something to keep in mind as well.
I like to think of the Lady in Chairs, Sisu Empowered Sibling, Maleficent Dragon and Dragonfire in there. Maleficent Dragon's inkable, but Dragonfire and now the new card, So Dragonfire is a 5-cost uninkable action, just banish chosen character. And now there's a new card in set 7 that's a 7-cost inkable, banish chosen character. Out of Order is the name of that card. Those are all just like this one grouping of late game spot removal tech cards. Like, what combination of these cards do I want to include in my deck as my options for late game removal of my opponent's characters? These are basically after the reset button is pressed. After Be Prepared happens, which combination of these characters do I want to include in order to make sure that I can get through the end of the game in full control still?
Yeah, and Ryan, thanks for mentioning those two cards because I forgot them. With the Maleficent Dragon, it is inkable, and it is instant removal. The trade-off, though, is it costs 9. So again, going back to the balancing of the game, I think that's fair, and it's hard to get to the 9 ink stage of the game. That's why you only really see Maleficent Dragon with Sapphire to get you to that ramp and that 9 ink much quicker. And that other card that you mentioned, what's the name of it again?
Dragonfire and Out of Order?
Out of Order, yeah, the new
about?
one. Set 7, Out of Order. That's an action, right? So, like, as opposed to these characters where instant board removal and they stay on the game, or the complete board removal of Be Prepared, it's a single action targeting a single character, and you don't get any lasting benefit out of it, as opposed to playing a character that is then on the board and then a questing threat, your next turn, or they can sing, or they can challenge and further take over the game from that control style. So I've really enjoyed, as I'm talking about it, and you can probably sound with the excitement in my voice, I've really enjoyed getting to that high control style and I feel like it's, at least from my perspective, and I know I'm biased, it's still balanced in a way that causes you to think about how you deck build with regards to so many uninkables in this ink color.
Yeah, I think Ruby also it does really embody so well the concept of control, because if you look at like these cards and their high cost and the fact that they're uninkable, right? Like, the whole point of a Ruby deck, it feels to me at least, in terms of when I've played it and also when I've played against it, is you're just kind of trying to manage the board long enough to where then you flip over and now you have all the bigger characters, you've removed a lot of your opponent's characters, and it really turns the tides. So a term that Ryan will often use when playing against what we call like a big control deck, which Ruby decks tend to be, is to try to get under it, and which means basically, right, you're like gonna quest really fast, put a lot of early pressure on, so before they can really get a foothold, you're already really close to, if not at 20. Because once they get all these big characters on, it's really hard to remove a Mal Dragon 7/5 stat line or a Sisu 5/4 stat line, right? These are really large characters that also have that removal aspect. So if you're running an Emerald deck and you've got a bunch of weenies, it's going to be pretty hard to remove those once they get on board.
That still needs to be a t-shirt. Please check out our Emerald podcast. That was a popular phrase in that Emerald podcast. Thanks for bringing that back. One thing I want to make sure to point out for our listeners with regards to Ruby, we're talking a lot about this instant banish of characters with a lot of these, and the concept of board wiping with completely removing the board and resetting. The other way of resetting, in a way, is challenging. So Ruby is the best color in the game with regards to challenging, and challenging early with Rush, as I mentioned, in the earlier parts of this podcast. Challenging is another way to take over the board, and being able to keep high strength, high willpower characters, which Ruby tends to have, on the board for multiple rounds, so that your opponent has to use more cards to your one card. Again, that's the way where Ruby gets its card advantage, is causing your opponent to use multiple cards to just remove a single card that you have. I can't emphasize that enough, as well as another way to think about the board advantage aspect of Ruby. As much of it's the cards are predicated on board advantage, you gain card advantage by forcing your opponent to use multiple cards to your board. So that's kind of the dichotomy, or the ebbs and flows that we see with Ruby. and that in color as well. Wanted to highlight that.
So we talked about these big removal, late game removal options. Obviously, there has to be a way to get to the late game. And so Ruby does have a couple of options I wanted to highlight as this like early anti-aggro strategy, or the early anti-aggro tech cards, if you will. Things to include it as like one or two or maybe three of in your index, in order to just like kind of ensure that you get through the early stages, you slow down the opponent just enough in order to get into your reset button, to get into your late game options, to get to Maldragon, to get to Be Prepared, all that stuff. So the three that I thought of was there's a 2-cost Queen of Hearts with Rush. That is very helpful in kind of dealing with some smaller threats earlier in the game, and that was teched in at I think it was NA Championships by Scott
Correct.
Markinson, and
Yeah, the
used it
Minnesotan.
to great effect in order to kind of navigate a couple of Amber Steel and more of the diggy hole, aggressive type deck lists. And then also the other two then would be a Super Goof, which is in that Dincam Fam list, the DKP list, and that's kind of one of the anti-aggro answers early. So that's basically on turn 3, you're playing this 4-cost inkable 2/4 stat line Super Goof that is going when it rushes, it has rush, and then when it challenges, you gain 2 lore as well. So not only are you kind of controlling out one of those smaller aggressive questers, you're also then gaining lore and advancing your game plan a little bit further as well. And then the Brawl is the third one, and we already talked about that one. A 3-cost inkable action, remove chosen character of 2 strength or less, I believe. And so those are the 3 things that I think of when I think of early anti-aggro tech cards, getting you to that late game, in addition to whatever other color you're pairing it with. Was there any other anti-aggro tech cards that you guys have in mind?
I think baby Sisu, the human Sisu, is one option. It's tended to be used twofold. So this is a 3-cost uninkable 1/1. So fairly weenie stat line for a Ruby card. But her ability again is when you play her, you can remove an opposing character with 1 strength or less. So she can be used to take out some threats, sometimes paired with something like an ice block to bring it down 1 strength and then using that. But it's kind of twofold, right? If you play that character, you get a character on board, you can remove a character, and then it also acts as a shift target for the big Sisu. The empowered sibling one can come out then as early as turn 6 on top of that small 1/1 human Sisu. But again, to Mack's earlier point, it is a removal card that's not named Brawl. It is uninkable.
Or whatever ink we talk about, Nathaniel can always find a weenie. He just keeps bringing it up.
Little Smokies must be his favorite party appetizer.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, I'll hammer like 20 of those in one sitting. They're amazing.
Back on track. The other Sisu shiftable target is the Sisu Emboldened
Warrior.
Yeah, that's also 3-cost. So typically you don't see the human Sisu and the Emboldened Warrior together. You usually choose one or the other. The benefit with the Emboldened Warrior is A, it's inkable, but
Hey!
its effect is gain +1 strength for each card that your opponent has in hand. So its base stat line is 1/4, 1 strength, 4 willpower. It does quest for 2, but if your opponent has 3 cards in hand, that 1/4 turns into a 4/4. So it allows you to have an early challenge target or a strong strength challenge target for its lower 3-cost request, so to speak. And then as your opponent starts depleting cards, you can then use it to quest, because it still quests for 2, and you can gain 2 lore and quick lore earlier in the game, which is something we don't really see with Ruby. This is probably one of the first cards that were introduced that had higher lore gain for a lower cost character. So that's something to keep in mind. And again, another shift target for the big Sisu for shift 6. Something to highlight as well.
Very good point.
One thing
important to note with that is the kind of what it usually gets paired with when that Emboldened Warrior is played in a deck is the 2-cost Flynn Rider Frenemy. 2/2 stat line, quest for 1, but this has a special text of at the start of your turn, if you control a character with higher strength than your opponent, any of your opponent's characters, something along those lines, then you gain 3 lore. So basically, the curve is place Flynn on 2, Emboldened Warrior Sisu on 3, and then usually the opponent has 3 or 4 cards in hand. So that is now a 4 or 5 strength Emboldened Warrior Sisu. That is really challenging to find a way to play something of that high strength that early in the game, and that is kind of one of the challenges of playing against a deck that plays both Flynn Rider, Frenemy, and Emboldened Warrior Sisu, and is able to play those out on curve. It honestly, when that gets played against me in whatever deck I'm playing, it completely changes my game plan. I have to figure out how to navigate around that because 1 or 2 Flynn Rider triggers, 3 to 6 lore is a huge amount of lore that early in the game. You just mentioned there's not a ton of lore gained early in a lot of Ruby decks because of the way that they're kind of set up to play and set up to win. So when if that Ruby deck is able to get 6 lore, maybe even 8, because you can't even answer the Emboldened Warrior Sisu then, and they cast at least once with it, then that's like they're halfway to winning, and they get 1 or 2 reset buttons, and they have the board controlled out after once you get to the late stage of the game too. So that's I think it's important to note is that Flynn Rider Frenemy 2/2 or 2 cost inkable 2/2 with the special text of gaining additional lore based on strength of the characters involved.
Yeah, I think Ryan, you had once mentioned that whole concept of like it's not like frenemy into Sisu on a 2/3. It's just as much about how it changes what your opponent has to prioritize as much as it is about getting early lore. And it is very on brand that it would be based, like Flynn Rider's effect would be based on strength because Ruby is such like a high strength color. It's just not really known for like questing lots early, and this I think in some ways like turns that a little bit on its head because you've got a lower cost character paired with another lower cost character getting a lot of early lore, versus these late game threats. So the Flynn Rider Frenemy and Sisu Emboldened Warrior combo is one way that Ruby decks can actually like race in a way with other decks, where if they can't remove it, you're just going to be getting so much lore so early that the game can be over really fast. And it actually was one combination that I had remembered using last set with my Ruby Amethyst list, because when you were on the play, odds are you were going to trigger Flynn at least once or twice, and they've been pivoting so much to try to answer that then you get to have other things. Once they've answered that, you have your other stuff on board ready to go. So it's a very hard deck to beat, I think, when you can't get rid of that Flynn Rider fairly quickly because of Sisu Emboldened Warrior's ability of being such a overstated character early in the game when they have lots of cards in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And to this point, we've kind of talked about the big wigs, and then we came down to like the 2-cost, 3-cost combos. Let's take another step back. We haven't talked about any 1-drops with Ruby because there aren't many. Really, it's the 1-cost item Vitalis Sphere, and then sometimes if you see a Ruby Steel deck, odds are you're going to see the action Fan the Flames. So with Vitalis Sphere though, first, it's a 1-cost inkable item. The text is pay 1 ink, and you can give a character rush and +2 strength.
And
so where
banish that item.
Yeah, and you banish that item. Correct. So where we see this combination a lot, and we saw this more pre-Hiram Flaversham ban, when we still saw a lot more item decks in the meta. But you would see this combination with the Maui Half Shark. So on turn 7, we would see someone play the 6-cost Maui Half Shark. You still have 1 ink available. So you ban, I shouldn't say turn 7, when you have 7 ink. You ban the Vitalis Sphere, give the Maui Half Shark rush +2 strength, not that it needed it, but then you can instantly challenge an exerted character and utilize the Maui Half Shark's ability of retrieving an action to get that Maui Half Shark lore engine going 1 turn earlier. So I think that's the biggest combination we've seen. But post-Hiram ban, I really haven't seen much of the Vitalis Sphere or Ruby utilized item decks anymore. We're seeing more of the solely action heavy focused decks, and then that's getting into Fan the Flames. Fan the Flames, like I said, is primarily in Ruby Steel, again with the Half Shark, but Ruby Steel with that combination, it's more focused on challenging and specifically challenging ready characters. So you challenge with Maui Half Shark, fan the flames, ready him. He can challenge again, and you see that in combination with the steel song. Gosh, I'm blanking on it. What's the one where you
One
can
last hope.
one last hope? It gives, not only can you challenge ready characters, but if it's a hero, you can challenge, or maybe it's the other way around. It gives you resist
Yep.
to, and if it's a hero, you can challenge ready characters. So then Maui
Yes.
Half Shark just recycles the fan the flames that it keeps gaining, and in combination, if it has a Mushu on board, you gain 2 lore every time you banish a character, so that just racks up an instant win, and again, another part of that board control with Ruby. So those are the 2 1-cost characters that I primarily see. Do you guys see anything other than that? If not, then let's dive into some of the more 4 costs, and then we can really start to dive into any of the higher cost cards that we might have missed.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it before, but whatever Ruby is paired with is usually what's going to take over the 1-cost line. Same with the 2-cost line and the 3-cost line, and then we start getting to 4, 5, 6, 7 plus beyond that ink costs, and that's where we see Ruby really taking over those deck lists. And that I don't have anything to add on the 1-cost line, specifically in Ruby.
Yeah, I'll double down on that. I think Ruby is an interesting and unique case where there are many very competitive deck builds that the only sub 5 cost Ruby card is Brawl. Otherwise, all the Ruby colored cards are like 5 and up in terms of ink cost, particularly Ruby Sapphire.
Yeah, absolutely, Ruby Sapphire. I know the one-off 4-cost cards we said. You already mentioned Super Goof Ryan. You gain 2 lore on challenge. Does have Rush. Be King Undisputed is another one of those instant removal cards. It's only 1 character card of your opponent, as opposed to a Be Prepared that wipes the whole board. I know the Moana Island Expert has seen a lot of buzz in set 7 due to the Ruby Amethyst Evasive build. It's another evasive character, but when paired with the Rush, what's the card? Peter Pan? Amethyst Peter Pan?
Shadow Finder.
Shadow Finder. The Peter Pan's ability being, every evasive character then gains Rush. So then you play Peter Pan turn 3, you play the Moana turn 4. That Moana has Rush. It's a 4/3 character. You challenge with that, and then it has the added extra ability is once it challenges, it's essentially the super crab, or it's not a super crab, but it's a character, another character version of a crab. You can give another character +3 strength. So I think that's highly effective. And then one other card I wanted. Oh, go ahead.
That's a really interesting set 7 card that's been making its way into lists, and I really, honestly, kind of have been enjoying the way that Ruby Amethyst has been crafting new decks in order to combat what the potential new meta is, and basically just crafting everything around the fact that my only goal in this entire tournament, I don't care if I win, I do not want to lose to a Emerald Steel discard list, because I'm not going to lose to a Diablo. Is effectively what I've interpreted all of these deck lists to be from Ruby Amethyst after the Hiram and Fortesphere bans, which has been entertaining to watch, and it's very interesting to see the specific combinations that come up, and the interesting new cards that we're able to see as a result of it.
Yeah, what's the fastest way you can get rid of the evasive Diablo? Let's just counter that with a crap ton of evasive Amethyst Ruby cards with Rush to immediately remove it, or remove it as soon as possible. So yeah. Then the other 4 costs we see is the Robin Hood Sharpshooter. I've never used it, but it's kind of got a fun ability. Is whenever a quest, look at the top 4 cards, and if you get to play an action for free. You guys are laughing. Did something happen between you guys with that? Or?
It did.
Man.
Not between us.
Oh gosh, I got cooked by a Christmas deck in my first set champs experience, playing as Blurple against a Christmas deck. I hadn't really practiced against discard. Didn't really know what I was looking at, what I was trying to expect or even anticipate at all. And then it was a really interesting list that we faced, and I think Nathaniel actually faced it earlier in the rounds, and this is my last round of Swiss. So I'm at my first set champs experience. I'm playing Blurple. I played two Ruby Sapphires and a Steel Song as my previous 3 matchups. So my brain was fried by the time I got to this round 4 of Swiss. And they had Robin Hood Sharpshooter based Christmas and action deck with Ruby Emerald. And I got absolutely cooked by it. I thought Robin Hood Sharpshooter was the crux of the deck, but really it was the discard package. I didn't know how to play against the discard package, so I was on like no cards. And they quest with Robin Hood, and they play Dragonfire to remove one character off my board, or they play Bruno for free, and I have no cards in hand, so then it gets removed from my board anyways. It's the same card basically, just if there's nothing in hand. So I just got absolutely dumpstered by Robin Hood Sharpshooter, and it felt really bad, and that's why I was giggling about it because I have a little bit of disdain about that card now, in the deepest part of my mind as whenever I read it or see it.
Yeah, it was one of the most interesting and unique builds I've seen, particularly one at a set champs where I've never seen that deck or something even resembling that since, whether it be at a casual locals or set champs after that. It was just this guy ran it and he knew the deck pretty well, and it did do some really surprising and interesting things because of that ability of being able to play an action for free. So he could either go the damage route by using Ruby removal, or he could go the discard route if he drew into green or emerald discard actions. So I think that's what made it like really kind of a cool synergy after we just like basically said like Emerald Ruby doesn't have a footing. Like it was just an interesting like weird list, and when it did hit, and anyone who plays Ariel digging for songs or Scrooge digging for items knows what it's like to whiff. But when it does hit an action, especially with something like a Dragonfire, like Ryan mentioned, you quested with it, you got the lore, and you get to just play this 5-cost action for free. I mean, that's an amazing ability to be able to use that. So if you didn't answer that Robin Hood pretty quickly after he was on board, it was going to be down steamrolling really fast.
I got to tell you guys of another instance with this Robin Hood. I was watching a YouTube video on it just to get a feel of the Robin Hood Sharpshooter and how it worked. I saw someone once pull the combo of questing with Robin Hood, so this would be on turn 5. Looked at the top 4. You can play an action of 6 or less for free. The action he played was the Return of Hercules, which allows you to play a character card from your hand for free. So on turn 5, he got to play Maleficent Dragon for free. I thought that was just an absolutely dirty play, and that was absolutely incredible to watch from when I watched that YouTube video. I think it was Lore Gains. I think, Ryan, you've watched him a couple times before.
Yeah.
And
I pay attention to his stuff. He plays really fun stuff. I like what he cooks up, and he's a really good player. So he's able to find success with some of the lists that I think I would just fall flat on my face with. So I think there's a little bit of pilot bias there, a little bit of like, oh, this looks pretty good, but also he's just playing things at the right time, doing the right things. He's clearly a skilled deck builder too, since he's able to cook up these unique builds, and I find success with them too. I almost 100% guarantee that if that Christmas list is back out at set champs in our area again, I would 100% guarantee Return to Hercules has made its way into that list, because I think that is
absolutely.
a really fun high roll when it hits, and it feels so good to be able to play Return of Hercules for free after questing for 2 and then removing something from their field with Maldragon, or even playing like a big Sisu and you get to nuke their entire board. Oh, can you imagine how good that would be? How good that would feel?
Yeah, that's it. That was my other thought too. It was specifically called like the Green Dragon deck. So he had 4 Maldragons and 4 big Sisus on the hopes of hitting this Return of Hercules combination to play one of those big dragons. I thought that was pretty fun to watch.
Incredible.
Yeah, so with that, the only other 5 and up cost card to touch on that we haven't talked about yet is Pirate's Life. Really the only, not the only, because we're talking about Be Prepared and Be King Undisputed. I would say the other song is Pirate's Life, in combination, right, with the Maui Half Shark. Not only can the Maui Half Shark sing this song, but you get the added extra benefit because it is an action to gain an additional lore. But this action reading, when you play this card, you gain 2 lore and your opponent loses 2 lore. So thinking about the high control aspect of Ruby, typically speaking, you see your opponent gaining a lot of lore early into the game, which might make you a little nervous as they're creeping up to the 12, 13, 14, 15, and you're still at 3 lore. But Pirate's Life gives you that extra cushion to reduce your opponent's lore while you're beginning to gain control of the game and start questing out for yourself with your bigger cost characters. So I believe we've touched on all the other ones. Maui Hero to All, Tremaine Medusa, Maui Half Shark, Be Prepared. Am I missing anything with regards to the 5 and up cost cards you can think of for Ruby?
No, I would just say I think something that was interesting with like one of the fun things about Lorcana is certain cards can come out and they will make another card that maybe was ignored or largely ignored relevant again. We had talked about this the other night where like Pirate's Life wasn't really being used, and with the rise of Maui Half Shark, Pirate's Life was very much revived as a very strong card because it could recur. And then because of Maui Half Shark's effect, when you play that action, you get an additional lore. So it's effectively a +3, -2 for your opponent. And then because you can then keep pulling it out of your discard when Maui challenges something. So a way to claw back, and like it's just cool that like cards can keep coming out and then make another card relevant. So I love that combo. Even when I get like clapped by it, it's like cool to see it happening because it's like that's a really neat synergy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I
So
don't
with
I don't ever think that thought has ever crossed my mind. Like, man, I'm really glad they were able to play this. That makes me feel good.
yeah. So with that, I think we've covered almost everything with Ruby, and I wanted to dive into kind of the last topic, kind of the dad related question, or kind of the more personally related question with blending that with Lorcana. So I think one of the things with Ruby that we've touched on here is challenging. And to me, I think the reason why I've gravitated towards Ruby is with challenging, I think there's just more competition there is my mindset, and being competitive with that. And I know the three of us grew up in sports, playing traditional sports and enjoying that competition. And I know we've touched on it maybe a little bit in previous episodes of the podcast, but like, what keeps you guys entertained specifically with kind of the competitive nature of the game? Or like what allows you to scratch that competitive itch? And then also that like your kids, that I think all three of us want to get our kids into sports. If you want to dive into like how are you teaching, do you plan to teach this game, and how do you teach that, both that competitive nature with the card game as well as maybe in sports with your kids? So I'll let Nathaniel go first.
Yeah, I'll start by I am firmly in the team don't let my kids win for the most part. Like there's certain things that like, I'll be like whatever, but for the most part, like if it's something that like I will let my 5-year-old occasionally like beat me in a race, but like he needs to know that for now I'm way faster than him. So like, I'm probably going to be in that camp of like, maybe have a yearly tradition where like we race on his birthday and we see how long it takes until he's officially beating me when I'm going full throttle, right? Like I think like teaching kids competitive outlets is really important, and depending on their personality, right, and what they're interested in. I know that myself, I am a hyper competitive person, used to be very much to a fault where it was like not always the healthiest response when I lost. So I think one thing I've been able to pride myself in, kind of leaning into like adulthood, was like finding ways to like lose with grace. I think that's really important, especially in any card game or any competition for that matter. But, I think there's in any competitive TCG, you've always heard stories of people who aren't losing gracefully. And I never want to be that person. I always want to be able to shake that person's hand or give them a nux and say GG's, right? Like at least do that. You can privately go be, mad at yourself for a misplay or whatever it is later. But I think always showing grace to your opponent and congratulating them on a game well played is of utmost importance, even if you're upset that you didn't get the result you wanted. And I think for me, Lorcana is fun because not only is it a competitive outlet that scratches that itch, it's also such a mind exercise in conjunction with that. So it's like it feels very gratifying when you do things well, or you accounted for plays that your opponent was going to do correctly and you anticipated well, or you like, I always say this term of like playing to your win condition. Like, I think that is something that's really exciting, and it's like this constant learning, especially as the metagame shifts. Like, your win condition options are always evolving, and I think that's really cool.
I think to Nathaniel's point that it is the mental stimulation and the mental side of the competitiveness inside of me. Obviously, you don't make it through college sports as a college collegiate athlete without having a deeply competitive nature. So in almost everything that I do, there's always this some undercurrent of competitiveness that I'm at least motivating myself with it, or there's some like outwardly competitive reward involved or something like that. So using this as a competitive outlet for the mental side of things and really trying to stretch that muscle as much as far as it can go, and finding success and victories in playing the right lines or making the right decisions or being able to then go back and think through like, oh, maybe I could get slightly better here next time by playing this just making this decision slightly differently and making those being able to make those adjustments and having that opportunity to improve is also something that I enjoy and that keeps bringing me back to the competitive, even just at the store level competitive set championship environment. Being able to like find those success points is that's what's gratifying to me. That constant, both the process of improvement and then also the result at the end of it of like this was a successful process because my goals were appropriate and I reached those goals and I maybe even reached a stretch goal or two. So that is what keeps bringing me back. And in terms of teaching the game, I mean, my kids are way too young for me to consider that at the moment. But it is something that if this game holds on and I continue to stick with it, it's something I would love to play with my kids as well, and include them in family game nights. Include this as a game that we play on a regular basis, or find a local store that we start frequenting for local events or local nights, just to kind of share the hobby with them. And there's a lot of teachable moments throughout the entire process too, I think. So being able to take advantage of those and that in addition to other things that we'll do together as a family.
One more thing, based on something Ryan just said, actually, is because my oldest is 5, he's on the verge of starting to get a bit more proficient with reading. And I think TCGs they offer a nice outlet for additional reading opportunities.
In a
And
fun way.
thinking back to our pod with Christian as a guest, I think I will actually implement those tools because my son is interested in Lorcana. He just doesn't really know what is happening on the cards, right? But I could definitely see following a very similar path that the footsteps that Christian took in terms of like start with a 20 card deck, right? Like get used to those cards and like let's read through the text on like what those actually do and what do the abilities actually mean, and go through that with him as a way to teach him and then also be able to play and like have him experience that. I think would be really exciting. So he's close but not quite there yet.
I wanted to echo your point, Nathaniel, too. I'm very much in the same camp where we are within my household is not letting your kids win and not letting your wife win either, too. I know my wife is super competitive just with board games in general. So, yes, we share the same mindset with that as well. And I know, Ryan, you've actually mentioned that and thinking back in a different podcast as well. So, not letting others
Nodding
win.
aggressively in concurrence with that point. Don't let them win. Make it challenging. Obviously, don't control them out of the entire game right away, but don't let them win.
Right, and very much when they do earn that win, it makes it that much sweeter. The flip side, too, is like thinking about sports and when our kids get better at us than with like traditional sports. Oh, man, I kind of rue the day when my kid can outdrive me in golf or like things like that where it starts to turn over and flip over, and you can kind of see that coming. But that's part of it, too. Part of growing up, part of dad life is watching your kids grow and succeed and getting better at their hobbies and what they enjoy. But the one thing I wanted to echo, too, is the two main sports. I mean, I played every sport growing up, but the two main sports that I got into were basketball and golf. Two very different sports, and the basketball is very team oriented, right? You got to utilize your teammates in order to make the most successful play to score a basket. And then golf is you yourself is battling the course and not necessarily a direct opponent. I think with that, what I've utilized and what I've enjoyed with Lorcana is that within our friend group, like it allows me to use that team aspect with, bouncing ideas off each other and testing different decks and, communicating with one another on how we prepare and for a set champs or what have you, or a local game night or whatnot. But also very much I am able to use that golf side of things as well, that once after the testing is done, after we've used the kind of the team aspect of the game, when it's just me and my opponent thinking about golf, like what can I do? Golf is also very much in there's a mental side of the game as well, so processing through your different scenarios based on the cards you have in hand or what you expect or maybe thinking you might draw based on what you've maybe mulliganed or what you've already siphoned or seen through your deck, and preparing kind of the 2-3 stages ahead of you as well, but utilizing that one-on-one aspect of the game with similar to what I am used to with golf. In not only yes, there is an aspect of golf where you are eventually trying to score a lower score than your opponent, but on top of that, like making sure you are sound within your own game and the mental aspect. That's what I've enjoyed and lean towards kind of the golf side of things when it comes to traditional sports. So with that, guys, anything else, Ruby? Have we hit it all with Ruby? I think we've talked a lot, but I wanted to give this an opportunity for any last minute topics here for Ruby.
I think I'm burned out on Ruby.
Heyo.
Straight fire.
Oh gosh.
Nice.
Now with that, let's close this up. Please be sure to check out our Instagram. Still the hunt for the enchanted pack pulls. Please follow us on our journey to pull that elusive enchanted card. All of this as well, you can re-listen to our podcasts on YouTube. I know we've mentioned it a couple times in previous episodes. We are still working on posting videos on our YouTube channel. That is something we want to do. Dad life takes over, but we do want to begin posting kind of these gameplay videos on YouTube as well with some us talking about gameplay over the video as well. So be sure to check out our YouTube. But with that, thanks everyone for listening, and gentlemen, let's get the duck out of here.